Welcome to the Wholesome Healing Collective.
Join us on our podcast for a journey into the hearts of healers from all walks of life, diving deep as we explore meaningful conversations that have the power to inspire, empower, and share life-changing wisdom.
Through this community, we hope to create a welcoming environment where our listeners leave feeling nurtured and uplifted. We are so delighted you are here. My name is Alyssa.
And I'm Renee. Grab a drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Me and Alyssa are back. Me as in Renee are back to talk to you about one of our favorite modalities that we use, breathwork.
Yes, I love breathwork. I agree. It's definitely my favorite tool.
I feel like it's probably the most underutilized tool that every single person has ability to access. And
Yes.
we aren't taught to do that.
And I think a lot of people think I breathe every day. I know how to breathe. Yeah.
Or they see little clips on Instagram of people breathing. How do I put it? There can be very, I don't want to say dramatic moments, but intense moments that sometimes show not the whole picture of what the journey is. And it can be intimidating when you see little clips of people who are maybe going through very animated processes during breath. And it's like, what is this? Why are people moving so much or having these emotional explosions during breath work? And while that can happen, I wouldn't say it's the norm, and it's all about your intention with it. So if you intend to calm and regulate with your breath, it's very unlikely you're going to have these crazy intense immersions. But yeah.
I love that you brought that up because I get a lot of those same targeted ads, I'm sure, because we type breathwork or we say breathwork a lot. So we get those. I don't know, what the general public gets, but with our modality rooted in healing and transformation, and it being a trauma-informed process, it's much more gentle in the beginning. Like a lot of our beginning sessions are just like creating this connection with the breath, creating this connection with the body, and feeling safe to quiet the mind and be in the body.
Yeah, that's a key differentiator, is that trauma-informed lens that not all practitioners have learned. Because safety is the foundation for everything we do, not just transformation and breath work, but transformation in all things we do. Just got to have the safety there. So it's so important. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. I love this because we're just shooting from the hip here. So this conversation is really unfolding nicely. And I love this.
What was your first exposure to breathwork? Do you remember what the scenario was?
So Sam Skelly, who was the founder of Pause Breathwork, or is the founder, and we both took her programs. She was on Sahara Rose's podcast and they were talking about breathwork, and obviously Sam's the guest, so she's talking about her transformation. And then she led everybody through a quick breathwork exercise, but at the time I didn't have time to do it. So I was like, I'll come back to that later. And then I finally did, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. And I loved experiencing Sam's energy. So I moved over to her podcast. And it wasn't until in the middle of one of her shows where she was talking about quieting the mind and controlling your anxiety that I was like really transformed and saw the benefits of breath work. So I kept coming back to this little 5-minute breath work session in the middle of this podcast over and over and over and over again. And I was like, there has to be like a better or easier way to do this. And if you know me, if I went around hiring somebody and just went to full facilitator training, which we can talk about that in maybe a coaching session or coaching me on this show, because I recently had a realization that if I don't hire somebody to do something, maybe I don't think people will hire me. Like, am I seeing like the worth or the value in my services if I don't ever go to somebody? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we can explore that later.
Yeah.
Anyways, but the breath work, I remember in the beginning of like fully starting the programs, when Sam would do like testers on her live calls, I was like, this is so amazing. Like I finally saw myself for who I really am. Like I was looking back in the Zoom camera thinking I'm so beautiful. And it was just like such a warm memory.
That's beautiful. I love that. That's so interesting. So my story, a little slightly similar, slightly different. Sam was also my first exposure to breath work, but I had stumbled upon her because she was a guest speaker for this online health summit. I can't even remember what it was called or who else was there, but I remember there being this little practice that she did before her talk. And it was probably only 3 minutes or so. And she dropped everyone in, went through probably the Halo Active, I can't remember. And I just remember coming out of those 3 minutes feeling like, whoa, where has this been? Why has no one told me about this? Like, I feel like that was maybe, I don't know, a year after I had, I guess, discovered the break away from the mind and getting into the body. And then this was like a whole different level. So my previous experience of getting into the body was through yoga, which was beautiful. And that was definitely a stepping stone that I was meant to go on, becoming yoga certified. But then finding breath work was a whole nother layer of depth that I hadn't accessed before. So similarly, I was like, who is this? Let me go find her podcast and her Instagram, and started following her. And then I think I listened to her podcast for like at least 6 months before first not finding, but first diving into her coaching program. That's what kind of brought me in. And it's funny because that was more of my structured mind being like, oh, you've already been a coach before. I was a personal trainer. I was kind of going in that direction. So this made sense to me. And then I signed up for one of like the discovery calls, and I get on the call and the girl goes through all the breathwork stuff. And I was like, oh, thank you, but I'm actually not interested in that one. And so she gives me all the other information. Then I get into the coaching program and I'm like, okay, actually I am interested in the breath work. So let me sign up for that too. And it was the most beautiful pairing. And breath work, I feel like, is something that was something I remembered. Like my soul has done it in lifetimes before. And I was just remembering how to do it again instead of learning like I do other things. So it's been a magical ride.
That's such a beautiful story. And the remembrance of doing breath work before. I love that.
Yeah. One of the things I love about breath work so much is the co-nourishment of it. What's been your experience with that piece, and maybe how it changed from like the nervous start of breath work to evolving into the co-nourishment of breath work with confidence and alignment and embodiment.
Mm. So I definitely was nervous at the beginning of practicum. Like, I'm supposed to remember what I'm supposed to say. I'm supposed to hold this space. I'm supposed to like be on Zoom, which thankfully by that time I was pretty comfortable because we had been meeting with, you and I had been meeting as pause partners in the coaching program, but I could see how that could be scary for other people. And there were a lot of people who didn't even use Zoom. So it was very nerve-wracking at the beginning. And then as I started to dive into like the energetics and space holding and the coaching constitution, which you've named before, it became so much more enjoyable to be in that space and to feel that connection back and forth with my breather. I love that. Even yesterday, I went and did a breathwork session at St. Vincent de Paul, which is like a holding space for the homeless population. People that are on the streets, they can come and hang out for the day, they can get food and just have like a place to be at, a home base. And I've been offering breath work there every other week, and even with them I still felt that like connection of they have so much to give still, even though they're not whole yet. And it was so beautiful. Um, yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's all.
Oh, that's so cool. That's really neat. Yeah, and that illustrates beautifully how powerful it can be to share breath work with anyone and everyone
Mhm.
that's interested in regulating their nervous system just on their own with their breath. And even just one session, you can walk away from that session and have this new tool, maybe not really know how to use it or access the same states or ground in the same way, but I can just take a deep breath and I can keep taking
Mhm.
deep breaths. And even if I don't necessarily know what to say to myself or what to visualize or any of that, just taking deep breaths will make a difference in your nervous system.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. I always tell people like even 3 deep belly breaths will change their state. They can walk into that interview or um, stand up and do their introduction. Like, it can really just change their energy. And it just takes those 3 breaths. Obviously, the longer sessions that we provide, start like really shifting things or exposing emotionality and trauma that's been held in the system. But somebody who wants to use it every day, you can use it all day, just like 3 breaths.
Hmm. Yeah. I'd love to um, talk a little bit about how we can use the breath to mimic the states we want to be in. So,
Mm,
um, taking those 3 breaths, we're going to be shifting our state, but why? Because when we get into a state where we're nervous or we're stressed or we have anxiety, what we don't realize is happening unconsciously is we're probably breathing shallow, right?
mhm,
And taking those deep breaths is actually providing instructions to our system to take on a calmer state. Because what do we do when we're calm? We breathe deeper and slower and more calmly. So it's like instead of letting the state change how we function physiologically, we're taking control of how we function physiologically so that we can change our state, which is
mm,
just a fun like switch of the perception. Because I know for most of my life, I kind of went through the world allowing everything around me to dictate how I felt. And if I would go into a hectic environment, I would feel stressed and anxious if that was the energy around me. And I wouldn't really know how to take my own sovereignty and control my own state. And little did I know I could just breathe. claim my energy back.
Yes.
And of course,
Yes.
there's more that you can do, energy cleansing and, drawing your energy into your little bubble and all those things. But the breath is where it starts, I feel.
Yeah. And using the breath to really amplify the sensations that you're trying to create, like joy and peace and love, and using that breath to just expand that energy. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, because energy is everything.
Hmm.
And that's what's beautiful too, is like sometimes if we're in a state where we're stressed or anxious or depressed, it kind of becomes our whole world and we're viewing the world through those lenses. But if we can find just that little speck of a different state in the body, no matter where it is, whether it's in the heart space or in your pinky finger, just that little bit, and then breathing into it and imagining that energy that you desire expanding in the body and expanding the body, even if it's just a tiny bit and a tiny bit, eventually it takes up space and kind of alkalizes and harmonizes with what else is there. You don't have to get rid of what's there. You don't have to change what's there. But can you let that little bit of energy you're breathing into balance out the rest? And that in and of itself can be magical, even if those other feelings don't fully go away.
Yes. Amazing.
What has been your most memorable breath session? And why?
Where I'm facilitating or where I'm breathing.
Ooh, both.
Okay. So facilitating, actually this one was really interesting. So in practicum, I was holding somebody through the intention of like self-compassion and love. And I had this playlist built for it. Um, and she was actually experiencing the session different than I had ever seen before. She was crying and laughing, like at points where I didn't think we were at the release yet. And so it was like a challenge to hold her and me through that and make sure like she's safe and that we can continue to breathe, or should we pause and just like let that energy run through her. It was very interesting. I will not forget that. And it's so beautiful that like crying and laughing are a release, but like they don't have to mean anything
Yeah.
really. And so that's really cool. And then my most memorable breathing experiences, they're always with Sam at the end of like our programs or the end of the force, like where it's just this big culmination of all of the energy. And I love the release that I get when I do those sessions with her, and she facilitates it in a way that's different from me and from you, where she'll play a lot more of the lyrical music, and she doesn't talk a whole lot in between, it's just the talking in between songs, and then she like lets us do our thing. I think it's probably because we're facilitators, like we know how to hold ourselves through each song.
Yeah.
And I felt just amazing at the end of those because I let the energy build and I let that release happen, and like accessed a new part of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
That you saying that reminded me of my most memorable also was the breathwork session for the graduation day of the breathwork program.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being out on my deck, and I was in the sun, and like you mentioned, it was like the culmination of all the energy. And I don't typically, I move energy a lot through physical movement when I breathe. So I'm often one that is shaking my hands or moving my body in some way. Sometimes I'll have an emotional release with tears, but it's just not as common with me. I usually move it through physical. And this day in particular, at the end, we went into a top hold, And after that hold, when I released, it was like an opening deeper than I had felt before. And I had this
Mm.
emotional release with tears that I hadn't experienced. And there was no meaning to it. There was no story behind it. It was just what needed to be released. And that's something that I love about breath work and I think is really appealing for people, is that you don't have to talk it out. You don't have to analyze. There doesn't need to be meaning or reasoning around it. It's just letting it go. And
Mm.
so it was like letting this release happen. And I felt like this deep connection, inward and outward. It was like I could feel this cord to the heavens. And it just like opened up in a way that's hard to describe, but it was magical. And it really solidified for me, like, this is what we get to offer people. Like these experiences, and like, I'll never have that experience again, ever,
Mm.
because every single session is going to be different and you're going to open in new ways or access new states or feelings or all those things. So that was my most memorable, where I breathed. And then my most memorable facilitating, it was powerful because it was my first experience holding someone through a really intense release. And I knew going into it that that might happen because she had mentioned feeling like she needed a release and feeling like the release wasn't just what she was holding on to, but it might be generational.
Mm.
So she was very intuitive and self-aware going into it in that regard. And she had her own rhythm with breathing. And I noticed in the session, where I would sometimes cue either um pausing in between breath patterns or switching breath patterns, she just kept going with it. So I was, in my mind, I'm like, okay, she must be feeling like she's close to something or accessing something. So, just intuitively switching up how I'm facilitating as I'm reading her was um a wonderful point of growth for me. And then when that release happened, it was very intense, and to the point where she was saying things through the tears, but I couldn't quite understand them. And so
Mm.
it was interesting for me to hold that space because in my mind, I'm like, do we need to pause? Do we need to stop? Is this too intense? But I just trusted that she knew what she needed. So I offered, if this is too intense, this is what you can do. And because she kept going with it, I just told her, I'm holding this with you. I can't hear you. So if you need me to do anything different, tell me. But I'm holding you in this because I didn't know if she was like telling me something or just letting words out. And then after the session, she just shared how much she had felt that she had released from her generations and letting energy send back to her ancestors where they came from and the chains, so to speak, that had been released from her in her current life. And I was just like, wow, that can all happen in an hour. It's just incredible. So,
That's
yeah.
so powerful. Wow. What is your favorite breath pattern?
Mm. It's really about your own pace and depth with any breath pattern to make it calming or not calming. So I guess I'll say the halo active. But for me, when I really want to activate and feel the energy moving in my system, I'll usually go to the triactive.
Mm.
Mm. But halo active is kind of the one that I'll lean on in smaller time frames when I only have a few minutes between meetings or if I just need to take a quick breather, I'll usually go to the halo active. So the halo active is so powerful, in through the nose, out through the mouth, but you have so much range that you get to utilize in that with your depth and your speed. Making your exhales long and slow is much more calming than if you're forcefully letting them out quickly. So just in the way that you exhale can change the energy that you're generating in your body, which is just so cool.
Mm. Yeah, Halo Active, that's my favorite too. The one that I have been, like when I go to St. Vincent de Paul, or when I do any like presentation style um sessions, I'm always doing like the deep belly breaths, really stimulating that vagus nerve and down regulating the nervous system, bringing people into that rest and digest. Because like you said earlier, we're often just breathing in and out our mouth, and it's like shallow, and it's keeping us in fight or flight all day long. And so when we can just take a minute to down regulate the nervous system, I think it's so powerful. And then, using the Halo Active in a way that is more energizing and uplifting, that's really great too. But I think a lot of us need that nervous system regulation.
Yeah. I know
Yeah.
for me, I don't know if it's just general, people, I do think in general, people are looking for that nervous system regulation and that calming effect. Um, but I also think I really attract that because I have that very earthy energy. And so people, I think, intuitively want to ground with me. So it's interesting because I'll notice that I will maybe cue some elevation in activation in a session. So we might start really grounded and calm, but I'll invite in some speed or some depth to generate more energy. And a lot of times I can tell people are like, no, nope, I'm gonna keep calming. And so we just roll with it. But it's interesting to observe that and just, keep that nature of agendalessness in that anything that I plan, I'm going to adjust depending on what the person needs and not try to create an experience because they're the one creating the experience. I'm just
Mhm.
holding the space and guiding. And I always tell people, like, if anything I say or invite in doesn't resonate, then just ignore me and do your own thing. And I love that people actually do that a lot. So that's
Yes. Yeah, I think it's more about the space that we're holding that allows them to do what they want to do in session versus like demanding that they do it our way. But it's like it's just that space, because they can breathe on their own, but when they're held in that container, it's like so different. It's so
yeah.
juicy and so safe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really that safety piece, I think, establishing that to empower them to make their
Mhm.
own experience. Because I know I've gone into classes before where I'm told that I need to do something, so I do without really thinking about the fact that I could choose otherwise or I could ignore them. But the people pleaser in me wants to follow instructions and do as the instructor says and, follow their lead. And that's not always a good thing. So I love
Mhm.
empowering people to do that. I think we need more of that, especially in these types of healing modalities, not going into it prescribing something as if it's the path to healing when there are 1,000 paths to healing. We all get to create our own path, right?
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk a little bit about what happens in a breathwork session, like what's happening in the body.
Mm,
You might feel tingles throughout your hands or your legs. You might feel what's called tetany, which is when your hands kind of clamp up, or you might feel that throughout your legs as well. I feel it in my throat. You might feel lightheadedness. You may experience sensations of like your heart opening or your third eye opening as these energy centers come online, which also means you may experience feelings of sensuality and sexuality. So that can be kind of an interesting piece. Anything you would add to those sensations, Renee?
temperature shifts I definitely, some people get hot, some people get cold. I personally get really cold when I breathe, which is interesting because I think going into it, I was like, oh, I'm going to be generating energy, so I'm going to feel warm. But for whatever reason, I usually need a blanket around. So
Mm-hmm.
totally
I love
natural,
that.
whichever way people feel.
Yes. And then the emotionality. So you'll be experiencing emotions, even if it's just for the shorter session. You'll just be quieting the mind, getting in the body, and experiencing what you've been carrying with you throughout the day or the week. If it's a deeper and longer journey, you might be experiencing stored emotionality and trauma. And so just meeting those emotions with your loving awareness, viewing them as like a witness and being with them in a loving way and holding them lightly. And if you can do that, they'll pass within 90 seconds.
Yeah. It's usually when we want to analyze and understand with the mind and or resist it that it
Mhm.
sticks around. So it's all the resistance that we often have of like, oh, I see you, but I don't want to look at you. I don't want to feel that. So I'm just going to cut my mind off from it. And then it's like, oh, I'm just going to stay here till you're ready. And then it just stays there running in the background. So it's beautiful how fast sometimes those emotions can release when we actually give our loving awareness and acceptance to it. And
Yes.
I think that's really different for people to hear, because no one wants to accept their pain or accept some of those things that they don't necessarily want. But it's in that loving acceptance that it can be processed and integrated and released.
Mm.
So
Yes.
that's one of the most powerful things about breath work, for sure. And it's beautiful using breath work with the coaching modality too.
Hmm. I mean, it definitely provides that spaciousness and that loving energy in the coaching container and throughout the session. I like to say that breath work is just working with the breath, taking conscious control over the breath to bring balance back to our life. And so for me, that was calm and stillness because I suffered from anxiety. So using it to downregulate my nervous system, but you can also bring in those energizing and activating breath patterns to bring that into your life too, if that's what you need.
Yeah. I love the point you made about spaciousness too, because
Mm,
I think so often we in our minds create our goals and our ambitions and the things that we want to draw into our lives, but we don't necessarily make the room for those things because we have all of our other things that are still present. So when we breathe and we create the spaciousness, it's like an emptying out. We're emptying
mm,
out all of these stored emotions or thoughts or anything that's not in alignment with what we want to call in, emptying that out to create space. And then in that space, we get to create. But if we don't
mm,
create space to create what we want, then how is it going to come into our lives? It's kind of like if have people talk about my plate's so full, in all different
mhm,
areas. My plate's so full. I have a full plate. Like, okay, if you have this full plate and there's literally no room, where are you going to put the thing that you want? Like, you have to empty something out. So it's deciding and declaring, oh, that emotion or just letting the body guide you. Because the mind wants
mm,
to pick, like, oh, it's that thing that I don't want. And sometimes that's helpful. Your mind might say this relationship isn't serving you or this scenario isn't serving you. And that's great as a starting point. But if you don't know, then just let the body lead. Just trust the
mm.
body's going to get rid of whatever it is that isn't in alignment, even if you don't know through the mind, the body knows.
Yes. I love that. Yes.
The
Oh,
body always knows. That also reminds me of what is that saying that words words and sentences and thoughts are the language of the mind, but feeling and emotion is the language of the body. So
Mm,
we have to kind of adapt our communication to realize that the body isn't going to speak to us in words, it's going to speak to us in emotions. And so, how do we listen in a different way than we listen to the mind?
ooh, that's so powerful. Love that. Anything else you'd like to add?
Mm, Thinking about the nervous system regulation, and just one note that comes to mind is that those times where we take an hour or 15 minutes or 5 minutes to breathe and bring in that regulation, it's not just that time period that we are regulating, because giving our body that break and breaking that cycle of fight or flight will have ripple effects far beyond that individual session. And so I think it's important to note that when we take that time, especially if we can be consistent with it, we're constantly giving our body this new blueprint on where we get to live. So we might be used to a fight or flight, and that might be where we default to or we keep going back to. But if we continually show the body how to regulate and give it those experiences, it's like giving it instructions for a new way to be. And eventually your default starts to change and
Mm,
calibrate to that new resting place. So I just wanted to point that out, because it's not something that we just like, it's not like a drink where it's like only when I have this thing will I have this relief. No, every time we do it, we're creating ripple effects that will help us moving forward far beyond that small time frame. So yes.
yeah, the beautiful marriage of neuroplasticity and nervous system regulation.
Yeah, that neuroplasticity, we get to create those new neural pathways. And that's an important note to make. I'm glad you mentioned that, about breath work, is that breath work scientifically is shown to create more neuroplasticity in our mind. So while we're doing work in the body, we're also allowing the mind to create these new pathways. And those new pathways are what then allow us to move out of the fight or flight and stay on a more regulated path.
Yes. Mm, it's
Mm-mm.
it's so good. Like, and we're not even done talking about breath work. I think we could still go on for like another hour. What is your magic, your medicine? If somebody was to book a session with you, what makes you different?
Mm, a good question. The first things that come to mind is flow energy and grounding. So those are my constitutions that are very natural to me. I'm very connected with the earth and that grounding energy. And I'm also very flowy in my heart energy. So
Mm,
I've learned to, so the vision that comes to mind is like, I kind of wrap, when I hold space, it's like I wrap the space in that loving energy. And while people, probably don't consciously feel it, I'm infusing that container with that loving energy, but it's also grounded and rooted. So I think my magic is really in working with people that are very stuck in the mind and allowing them to ground down and get into the body, which in a sense is, what we're all doing with breath work. But I think that unconscious calibration to my energy is often the medicine that people need, um, which is, I think, a lot of times why people come in and they're like, all scattered and I'm really in my head and I'm anxious. And then 5-10 minutes in, they're like, I'm glued to the ground. I'm ready to take a nap. And I love that. So
Yeah, I've definitely witnessed that and that energy from you, and it's so beautiful.
what about you? What is your magic?
My magic. I've been told that I hold people so like gently that it allows them to go deeper into their process and into uncovering what it is that they're trying to work on. And using the pacing and the titration, it's like it's just this gentle unfolding of what's happening. And then as I've added Reiki onto my modalities, Reiki is infused in my breath work, which I think is really cool. And then I lean into my intuition a lot and just letting that guide what I'm saying in session. And it's usually not me. It's either the client's guides or my guides that are coming through. And I just absolutely love the unfolding of that.
Yes, me too. I often at the end of sessions don't really remember what I said necessarily because I was just, letting the intuition, and I always say a little prayer before going into session. Like, I won't say the whole thing, but essentially inviting in this, like, I want to be a conduit and a channel for whatever it is that other person needs, and allowing that intuition to flow and guides and divine power to move through me and speak through me. And it's amazing. It's really cool.
Yes.
I think that's my favorite thing that I look forward to continuing to grow and build on in breathwork and life in general.
Feeling so connected and tapped into the divine as a facilitator. It's so cool. So we'll have our links below to work with us, or in the show notes, wherever you're watching or listening to this. I offer 30-minute sessions or 60-minute sessions, but since breathwork compounds over time, it's ideal that you book like a package or something with me, and we can talk more on a discovery call. What about you, Renee?
Yeah, same here. I offer both. I typically lean more towards those longer sessions, but I love offering the shorter ones as a way to kind of titrate or be an energy shifter. Yeah. But like you said, it's really magical when you commit to that unfolding over time. While one session can be really powerful, it definitely compounds as we make that commitment to ourselves to continually come back and go deeper. It's almost like the system, one session, I've had this, a client relay this back to me when she kind of discovered like an inner child during a session. And it was almost like yeah, you're here, but you won't be back. There's like a reluctancy. It takes time to build trust in the system with all of our parts and pieces. So honoring the fact that if we've been ignoring our system for so long, it's going to take some time of acknowledgement and continued work for that trust and safety to be built in the system with ourselves too.
Yes. I love that.
Mm.
How does that feel? Does that feel complete?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like you said, I feel like we kind of scratched the surface, and we'll probably do more conversations on this later, but I think it's a beautiful start.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I hope you have a beautiful day, everybody.
You're all beautiful. Go breathe.